Well, hello, it's Miss Gina, and you're at Gina's Planet, and I'm so glad you're here. We're going to read Cyril's Big Adventure. It's by Lizzie Walkley. And then we're going to read chapter 3 in our Christopher Robin book that we started. We're on chapter 3 there. That's Winnie the Pooh. Yes. And this is Cyril. Cyril's Big Adventure. So let's dive right in. And there he is. So many. This book belongs to, I guess we need to write somebody's name in there. Oh, look at the pictures. They're wonderful. There's a toucan. There's a butterfly. You see the fish. And Cyril, in case you haven't guessed, he's a sloth. That's right. In the humid depths of the Costa Rican rainforest lived a sloth named Cyril. And his big brother, Horace. Uh-oh, spoiler alert. I already told you. I didn't tell you about his brother, Horace, though. Horace was content and never felt bored. But Cyril was restless and his mind always raced. Actually, it says it soared. His mind always soared. With dreams of adventure, leaving the jungle behind, with his sights on the city where life was refined. He wants to go to the city. He wants to leave the rainforest. What are those? You guessed it, ants. So Horace was content, and Cyril's mind always soared. He was not content. There's an airplane. The plane. With all of his belongings, Cyril caught a small plane, which flew out of the forest that glistened with rain. Because it's a rainforest after all. We think it might do a lot in the rainforest. If you said rain, you're right. Over the mountains and rivers so pretty. Over the mountains and rivers so pretty. Cyril could not wait to explore the big city. He's ready. He's looking out his window in the airplane. He's got a window seat. Restaurante. First stop was a restaurant with food a la carte. That means you can buy it piece by piece. A la carte. But poor slow Cyril barely had time to start. I don't know if you know this or not, but sloths are slow. They do everything very slowly. Toot toot, beep, honk honk. The cars sounded so angry. When he crossed at the crossing, still feeling quite hungry, he didn't have time to eat. All the cars. Toot toot, beep, honk honk, beep beep, beep beep, toot toot. L Park. Climbing frame, some swings. This place looks like fun. But so slowly he climbed that the kids got so glum. They're having to wait in line behind him to go across. Because why? Why are they having to wait? Is he fast? Or is he... He is slow. Slow is the opposite of fast. Sprinkles and sauce on Cyril's ice cream, which before he could eat it, dripped off like a milk stream. Oh no, he ate it too slowly. It's melting. It's melting. That's terrible. Good ice cream going to waste. It was all so fast in this place far from home. Everything's fast here. Cyril slumped on a bench and felt so alone. There's a palm tree. He went somewhere tropical still. There he is. He slumped. He looked up through his tears and saw a great sight. A picture of home and a very cheap flight. Oh, look. On the truck. He sees home. And there's an airplane. Think he's ready to go back home. Things do move faster in the city. As fast as he could, which was really quite slow, Cyril gathered his things and decided to go. Back home to Horace and his home in the jungle, where time passed quite slowly and nobody grumbled. Oh, they're reunited. There's his airplane. Got him home. He realized then that though adventure was nice, being back home was just paradise. Home was paradise to little Cyril. And that was the end of our book. And there's some more of those jungle plants. If I didn't drop something, it wouldn't be me. There it was. So we're going to dive right into chapter 3 in our Christopher Robin book. We left off on chapter 3. We read chapter 2 last time. Now we're on chapter 3. Chapter 3. Pooh awoke with a mumble, a grumble, and then a small sniffle. Slowly he opened his eyes. His red sleep cap was askew on his head, and as he fully awakened, he stretched a long, stretch. Oh, goodness. He's waking up. He felt as though he had been asleep for years. He shivered, feeling oddly cold until slowly warmth began to spread through him. Sitting up, he sniffed the air. What do you think he sniffs? What do you think he smells? He sniffs the air. Something smelled very, very good. He said, honey. The smell lured him out of the bed, and he walked across his room toward the dresser that stood in the far corner. His image peered back at him from the full-length mirror beside the dresser. He cocked his head, taking in his rumpled fur and his disheveled nightcap. Smoothing down his fur, he frowned. Something didn't feel right. He was confused, more confused rather than usual. There's Pooh Bear. He's more confused than usual. Huh. I'm going to tuck him in right there. He can listen. I've forgotten what to do, he said, looking around the room. Then his eyes brightened as he took in the kitchen cupboards. He's looking at the cupboards. Ah, yes, he exclaimed happily. Time to make myself hungry with my stoutness exercise. Bending over, he began to stretch his front paws down toward his feet. Then he raised himself up and did it again. As he continued his stoutness exercises, he sang a little song. When I up, down, it says up, down, up. When I up, down, touch the ground, puts me in the mood. When I up, down, touch the ground, in the mood for food. On cue, his tummy let out a loud rumble. His morning exercise routine done, he eagerly made his way over to the cupboard. Reaching up, he opened it and cringed at the loud squeak that followed. If he hadn't known any better, he would have said he hadn't opened that particular cupboard in a very long time. But that would be impossible. This was the honey cupboard, and he had honey every day. Pulling the door open the rest of the way, he smiled at the large row of pots that greeted him. Each one read honey on the side. H-U-N-N-Y, not H-O-N-E-Y. His belly rumbled in anticipation as he grabbed one. But to his horror, when he reached inside, he found that the jar was empty. He grabbed another one and opened it. It was empty too. Tossing it over his shoulder, he grabbed another, and still another. They were all empty. Bother, Pooh said. Somebody seems to have eaten all the honey. Then he raised a paw. But there's always an emergency smackerel hiding somewhere. Sure enough, at the very back of the cupboard, hidden behind still more empty honey pots, was a jar labeled an urgency honey. U-R-G-A-N-C-E-E. Emergency honey. H-U-N-N-Y. Closing his eyes and smacking his lips in eager anticipation of the sweet, sugary goodness that was about to make his mouth and tummy very happy, Pooh stuck his paw into the jar. But when he pulled it out, he saw that his paw was not covered in golden goodness. It was not covered in anything. The jar We missed some words. Lifting the jar to his face, Pooh looked inside, squinting his eyes, trying to see if there was even the smallest dollop of honey that perhaps his paw just hadn't reached. He stuck his head still farther in, until with a pop, pop, his whole head went into the jar. For several moments, Pooh stood there, pot stuck, trying to dislodge his head. Finally, with another pop, it came free. Stuck to the end of his nose was a note that read, Pooh, I owe you an emergency, honey pot. Signed, Pooh. Uh-oh. Who got into his emergency honey? It was Pooh. Pooh did it. Yes. He admits it. He did it. It was him. So he gave himself an OU. Pooh frowned. His tummy rumbled louder this time. This was not good. Not good at all. He had done his exercises and as such was now very, very hungry. He put a paw to his thinking spot. Think, 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 think. Oh, Pooh is thinking. Think, 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 think. That is how Pooh thinks. He is thinking. He's got the paw to his thinking spot, and he began to tap. Honey, 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 honey. Where could he get more honey? Then he had an idea. Perhaps Piglet's emergency honey hasn't yet been eaten by either me or this other Pooh who thought ahead and wrote that note. He would just have to take himself down to Piglet's and ask his friend. Quickly putting on his red shirt, Pooh opened the front door, but he stopped before stepping outside. If it weren't for his need for honey, he probably would have liked to have stayed inside. It was gloomy. It was a gloomy and gray day. Fog hovered over the ground, making it hard to see, and it was quiet. At least it was until Pooh's tummy rumbled again. Hesitating, Pooh weighed his options. Stay inside and avoid the icky day, but be hungry? Or take his chances to get to Piglet's and find honey. He didn't hesitate long. Pooh stepped out into the fog. It didn't take the bear long to reach his friend's home in the base of the large beech tree. But while the brown door looked the same and the small window above it was open, there was something very empty-looking about Piglet's house. The sign that stood to the side of the front door with the words Trespassers W hung askew, and the carved words were hard to read through the moss that had begun to grow in them. Pooh hesitated. The whole place felt forgotten. Pooh walked up and knocked on the door. Piglet! He called out, It's Pooh! Are you home? There was no answer. Pushing open the door, Pooh peered inside. Sure enough, Piglet was not home. He frowned. Where would his friend be on such a gray day? Once again, he put his paw to his thinking spot. Think, 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 he said. Who would want to be alone on a day like today? He stopped tapping his head. That was it. No one would want to be alone. Piglet must have gone to find one of their other friends. Shutting Piglet's door, he turned and headed back into the woods. He would try Eeyore's next. Not surprisingly, Eeyore's gloomy place, as he liked to call his home, was as usual rather gloomy. And in the fog, it was even gloomier. It was also quiet, just like it had been back at Pooh's. And as the bear wandered through the boggy area, he saw that it too seemed run down, just like Piglet's house. Eeyore! Pooh called out. There was no answer. Neither of his friends were there. Maybe, he thought, leaving the gloomy bog, they had gone to find Rabbit. Rabbit always had the answers for everything. Maybe they had gone to ask him why the 100-acre woods seemed so, well, abandoned. But when he arrived at Rabbit's house, it was empty too. Rabbit, he shouted, I require an answer. Usually that got Rabbit right outside of his hole. The stuffy old animal rather enjoyed being the one to tell people things. Only this time, Rabbit's head didn't appear, and when Pooh dared to stick his own head down the hole, the very same one that he had ended up trapped in on more than one fateful occasion, he found Rabbit's den as empty as Piglet's and Eeyore's living areas had been. Oh, bother. Oh, bother. Pooh is looking for the children. He sees you. Pooh muttered, Where is everybody? And so it continued as Pooh wandered through the vast 100-acre wood. No matter where he went, he couldn't find a single soul. Hello! He called out as he walked along. Can anyone hear me? Kangaroo? Tigger? Owl? No one answered. The only voice he heard was his own, echoing back to him from all around. Tigger, 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 Tigger. Ow, 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 ow. Wrapping his arms around himself, he shivered. Then he tugged his red shirt down over his belly. What had happened to his friends? Pooh didn't know what to do. Oh no. Whenever there was a problem, his friends would help him solve it. What is he going to do? They're not there. But now there was a problem and no friends. What was he to do? If only Christopher Robin were still around, he would have been able to help. But come to think of it, where had Christopher Robin gone? Pooh hadn't seen him in an awfully long time. Suddenly, through the fog, Pooh made out a flash of color. A gust of wind blew and the color became clearer. Green. He was looking at a green door in the base of a large old tree. Another gust of wind hit the tree and the door cracked open with a loud creak. Oh, goodness. Pooh smiled. He knew that door. The door through which Christopher Robin is known to appear. He cried, inching forward. The green paint was chipping and the door itself was covered with vines. A pile of leaves lined the bottom. Christopher Robin, are you there? Pooh called out. As if in answer, the wind kicked up another notch. The door swung completely open. Forgetting to be scared, Pooh hurried forward and peered into the darkness. Christopher Robin? He called again. It's me, Winnie the Pooh. It's me, Winnie the Pooh. Are you finally home? There was no answer. Pulling back, Pooh tapped his thinking spot again. Think, 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 he muttered. What to do? What to do? He thought about his missing friends. Then he thought about the door that had suddenly appeared. He thought about Honey, but only for a second. And then he realized he knew what to do, or what had to be done. He had to find Christopher Robin. Ah, yes. He said triumphantly, Christopher Robin will help me find everybody, or help everybody find me. That will be the order of looking for things. Pushing aside the vines and dead leaves, Pooh took a deep breath. Excuse me, it made me cough. Too deep. So, there it goes again. Before he could scare himself out of it, he headed through the door into the darkness beyond. A moment later, Pooh's head popped out from the hollow part of the old tree trunk. The bear looked around. He was still outside, but he was not in the 100-acre wood anymore. For one thing, the fog was gone. And the sun was shining. For another, he could hear birds chirping in the sky above. And for yet another thing, from what he could tell by looking around, he was in a garden, not in the middle of the woods. Christopher Robin, Pooh called out. Hello? There was no answer. Pulling the rest of his body free from the tree trunk, Pooh began to wonder. If the green door was the door through which Christopher Robin is known to appear, it seemed only reasonable that Christopher Robin should be somewhere on the other side of the door. Pooh had to look for him. He wandered all around the garden, peeking behind bushes and bird fountains. No Christopher Robin. He wandered by a large house with lots of doors and quite a few windows, but still no Christopher Robin. Seeing a gate, he walked up to it and pushed it open. On the other side of the gate was a long drive that lined the garden. If I were Christopher Robin, the bear asked himself as he made his way down the drive, where would I be? Upon reaching the end of the drive, Pooh stood for a moment. He didn't quite know what to do. He knew that Christopher Robin had to be somewhere. Because he had come through the door, Christopher came through. But Pooh had never been beyond the 100-acre wood, and he was feeling rather nervous and hungry. It was hard to think clearly with his tummy rumbling. Just then, two young girls passed in front of him. They looked around the same age as Christopher. Maybe they were going toward his friend. He began to follow them. As he walked, noisy contraptions on wheels began to appear, making loud honking noises. As they moved past, he lost sight of the two girls, instead finding himself wandering among the legs of very tall boys and girls. These woods are very busy, he said, stopping as people rushed around him. Who is chasing all these people? Yet, while Pooh was noticing everyone and everything, no one appeared to be noticing him. That is, until he came face to face with a large dog. The creature raised its lips and snarled. "Grrr." been looking for Christopher Robin," Pooh said. Unaware that the dog was not pleased by his appearance, "Have you seen him?" In response, the dog snarled louder. Then Pooh noticed a large carrot on a cart just out of the dog's reach. "Oh," he said, understanding the dog's behavior immediately. "You're hungry too." Reaching up, he grabbed the carrot and gave it to the dog. The dog wagged his tail and began to munch on the carrot. Pooh smiled. "I must introduce you to my friend Rabbit, if I can find him." Saying a quick goodbye to the now happy dog, Pooh continued down the street. He so desperately wanted to find his friend. But no matter where he looked, there was no Christopher Robin. He peered behind a large red fire hydrant. He glanced through open doors, none of which were green. He checked under a table with 3 black hats sitting on it, but all he found was a bunch of fake flowers and a bunch of holes in the top of the table. When he popped his head through one, he found himself staring at a crowd of kids who were watching a strange-looking man in a cape make odd gestures with his hands. Seeing Pooh, the kids let out a squeal of delight. "Oh, bother," he said, ducking his head back down and stumbling out from under the table. Just as Pooh was beginning to lose hope that anything good would come of this adventure, a bee flew over his head. On cue, Pooh's tummy let out a loud rumble. "Hello, bee," he said in delight. "Oh, please tell me you have a honey tree." Craning his head back so he wouldn't lose sight of the buzzing insect, he began to follow it. It made a zigzagging route through the streets. Pooh tried to keep up, but several times he almost lost the bee as he had to duck and weave around the people cluttering the sidewalk. Cluttering the sidewalk. Finally, the bee flew up and over the fence, disappearing from sight into the very same garden that Pooh had departed from not long ago. "Oh," he said, somewhat deflated. His tummy rumbled and rumbled again, louder. He knew he should keep looking for Christopher Robin, but he was growing so weak. He couldn't go on, not unless he found some honey or took a nap. Pushing open the gate, he once again entered the garden and then meandered over to the shadiest tree he could find. Plopping down, he leaned back against it. Yes, that was it. He would just rest his eyes for a moment. Then, once he was rested, he could continue looking for Christopher and honey. Christopher stood up and stretched. His back let out an angry crack. He had been hunched over his desk since he arrived at Winslow Luggage earlier that morning, not even taking a break for lunch or to use the bathroom. Unfortunately, all the hard work had resulted in little progress. He was no closer to cutting costs, and from the looks of his exhausted and defeated team hunched over their desks, they had had no better luck. Walking by, he ordered them all to go home and then decided to leave himself. All he wanted to do was go home, pour himself a drink, and crawl into bed. But to his dismay, as he got off the double-decker bus in front of his home, he caught sight of his neighbor, Cecil, loitering in front of his house. The man had been after Christopher for months now to finish a game of chess that he had unwittingly entered into at a house party. He had made the mistake of leaving the game unfinished, and Cecil apparently did not like things left unfinished. The very last thing Christopher needed after the day that he'd had was a run-in with Cecil. Quickly he ducked through the green gate that led into the garden. Lost in thought, Christopher made his way across the garden and sat with a thunk on a bench underneath the largest tree in the garden. He dropped his head into his hands. On the other side of the tree, Winnie the Pooh awoke from his nap. Realizing he was still hungry and thinking he was still no closer to finding his friend, he too put his head in his paws. "Oh, what to do," Christopher said, sighing. "What to do indeed," Pooh said, answering the question he hadn't even been asked. Christopher's head snapped up. That voice! He knew that voice. Turning around, Christopher's eyes widened. "Pooh?" "Christopher Robin?" Pooh shouted back. His shout was much happier sounding than Christopher's. Jumping to his feet, Christopher began to back away. No, you can't be here," he said, holding up his hands. "You can't be here. This can't be happening." He began to pace up and down. There had to be a rational and reasonable explanation for why his childhood friend, a talking bear, had suddenly appeared in this garden. Maybe the sandwich he had eaten earlier while bent over papers had been bad. He hadn't even looked to see what he was eating. Although, if that were the culprit, wouldn't it be his stomach that was acting up, not his head? He kept thinking. Perhaps there was something in the air. Could he be dreaming? Maybe. He pinched himself. Ow! Nope, that wasn't it. Then it came to him. It's stress, he said out loud. I'm exhausted. Oh God, Evelyn warned me. As he spoke, he began to circle the bench. That wasn't the best idea. He ended up coming face to face with Pooh, the bear smiling up at him happily. I've cracked, Christopher said. I've totally cracked. I didn't see any cracks, Pooh said. He reached up a paw and ever so gently touched Christopher's hand. A few wrinkles, maybe. The observation was so simple and so classically Pooh that Christopher felt the sudden need to sit as it began to occur to him that this was really happening. His childhood friend was here, in front of him. The feel of the bear's warm paw only served to solidify his thought. The moment his paw touched Christopher's hand, it felt like he was right back in the 100-acre wood. Pooh? He finally said, finding his voice. It shook with wonder and a fair amount of shock. You're here? How are you here, Pooh? Well, I went through the door through which Christopher Robin is known to appear. And now I am here, he said, it with absolute innocence, as if it were the most obvious explanation. Christopher found himself nodding until he remembered something. But the tree, I remember, was in the woods behind the country cottage, not here in London. I suppose it's where it needs to be, Pooh replied with a shrug. Not quite ready to believe all this, Christopher began to circle the large tree. He looked at the base. He looked up near the branches. He looked on all sides, but there's no opening. He finally said, "No door on the other side." "Oh," Pooh said, shrugging. "We must not need it anymore." "That's a silly explanation." "We must not need it anymore?" "That's a silly explanation," Christopher replied. Pooh smiled proudly. "Why, thank you." Then he frowned, taking in the serious expression on his friend's face and the way he crossed his arms sternly as he turned and continued to stare at the tree. "Are you glad to see me, Christopher Robin?" he asked softly. Turning, he gazed down at the bear. Pooh's big eyes looked up at him. A warmth began to spread through Christopher as memories of a long ago time unearthed themselves in his mind. He was happy to see his old friend, he realized. Or at least as happy as he got these days. He opened his mouth to tell him so, but suddenly he heard the sound of footsteps. A moment later, Cecil Hungerford rounded the corner. "Well, hello there," the nosy neighbor called out. Just in the nick of time, Christopher managed to shove Pooh under his oversized coat. Then he put his hat over the bear's head. Unfortunately, Pooh didn't take too kindly to his new location and struggled in Christopher's arms, making the overcoat shimmy. Shimmy, shimmy, cocoa pop, shimmy. Anyway, shimmy. "What have you got there, Secret Susan?" Cecil said, coming closer and trying to get a look under Christopher's overcoat. Christopher turned his body so that Pooh was farther from the neighbor's prying eyes. "Just a cat," he said, coming up with a story on the fly. "Definitely a cat. We just got it." "Oh," Cecil said, looking to Christopher's horror, even more interested. "Can I stroke it? I love cats." "Not this one," Christopher said hastily. The man was incorrigible. Why wouldn't he just take the hint and leave? "This is a nasty, diseased cat, a bitter." They finally seemed to get through to Cecil, and he took several steps back. Christopher did the same, so that the two men were now standing awkwardly several feet from each other. Christopher nodded over his shoulder toward the house. "I was just taking it inside for some milk. Rehabilitate it." Inside his coat, Pooh, who had stopped moving briefly, distracted by a zipper, resumed his thrashing. "You're squishing me," he shouted. The protest came out as a mumble, but it was still loud enough for Cecil to hear. "What the?" Cecil said, giving Christopher a confused look. Christopher tried not to groan. This little meeting needed to come to an end fast. "I said that," he quickly explained. "Sometimes my voice sounds like that." He cleared his throat and spoke his next words as Pooh-like as possible. "You're squishing me." That was not Pooh. "With your demands to play chess." The explanation was lame and apparently seemed to placate Cecil, who, with one last look at Christopher and his coat, finally turned to go. "Tomorrow, then," he said over his shoulder. "After all, we've got all weekend." Christopher nodded already, coming up with excuses to get out of the game he had just locked himself into, and then hurried through the garden and into the house. Chapter 4. That was the end of chapter 3. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye. Pooh says bye. Tell Pooh bye. Bye, Pooh. Bye. I'll see you next time. I hope you're enjoying the story. So remember to grow your brain and read more in 2024. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.